future challenges and concerns. Key issues. So when we look at future challenges and concerns for law enforcement, they are very extensive and it entails a lot. And we're going to talk about quite a bit of this today. So, strategic management, ongoing process that seeks opportunities to enhance operational efficiencies by identifying internal issues, external influences that hinder organizational stability. Uh, Trust between law enforcement agencies and the people they protect and serve essential is essential in a democracy. So when you look at all the changes, strategic management, it involves a lot. Management's focus on management's ability to addressing the issues that the neighborhood, the ongoing issues. You got stuff to deal with accountability, transparency, oversight. All these things are important. Law enforcement agencies are not like companies. They can't keep a lot of things confidential because as by virtue of what they do. So, and you have to have trust between the community and the law enforcement agencies and stuff. You can't have a police state where it's the police against everybody else, or if it's perceived to be that way. This comes up a lot: use of deadly force. So, well-meaning police officers making bad use of force decisions quickly. So, this is when somebody has to make a decision use of force whether or not they're going to use deadly force. Now, deadly force means that you're using a force that is appropriate for actually killing someone, and we refer to it as stopping a threat. No two police officers' problems are precisely the same. Stresses and time constraints lead to a high percentage of inappropriate decisions, leads to acceptance of the officer's perceptions of the incidents, leads approval to unnecessarily police leads approval to unnecessary police violence and the inability to consider whether the situation could have led to a successful nonviolent conclusion. It results in failure of the police to meet their highest obligation, the protection of human life. So when they have to make a split-second decision, they're making a decision whether or not to stop a threat, to apprehend somebody, whether or not use of force is appropriate. Sometimes police officers get it right, sometimes they don't. And here's the thing about it is no two officers are in exactly the same situation. Everybody's perception of deadly force is different. For instance, a 6'5" police officer who's 6'5" and 250 pounds, who is fighting someone who's 6 foot and 200 pounds. That's a situation where the police officer is bigger. However, if that guy is 6 foot and 200 pounds and the police officer is a female and she's 5'5" and 150 pounds, that's going to be different. Her definition of deadly force is going to be different than his. Research conclusions on deadly force. Police use force infrequently. Police use force typically occurs at lower end of the force spectrum, including grabbing, pushing, and shoving. So a lot of times they don't even use deadly force. Use of force typically occurs when police officers are trying to make an arrest and the suspect is resisting. Use of force appears to be unrelated to an officer's personal characteristics such as age, gender, and ethnicity. Use of force is most likely to occur when police officers are dealing with persons under stress or alcohol. So you can see under these different circumstances, when they look at the use of force, a lot of times it's involving people, certain situations, people who are agitated under alcohol, when they're trying to make an arrest. You can try to make an arrest on someone. It could be for something minor, but you may be trying to arrest somebody who says that I don't want to go to jail. And so now use of force goes in because you may have to, this person is going to resist. You may actually have to fight the person. So all these different things that come into play when it comes to the use of force. And use of force entails everything from just a peaceful arrest all the way up to deadly force. Use of force meta-analysis. So Bolger's 2015 analysis of 44 studies found that police use of force was more likely encounters involving serious offenses, a resistant arrest suspect, an arrest decision when citizens are in conflict, when more officers are present during a police initiated encounter. These variables increase the probability that an officer will use force to subdue the suspect. Minority, male, and lower class suspects were more likely to be the targets of police use of force. Gender police officer appeared to play a minor role, but males were more likely to use force. So when you see this, A lot of times they looked at it and found out, what type of situations where you have use of force situations come in. A lot of times they were minority men, lower class people, and a lot of times the officers who utilized the force were males. Deadly force policies. Friedel notes that police executives cannot eliminate the necessity for the use of force, but they can optimize it by adopting sound and effective policies, implementing mechanisms to promote policy adherence and accountability, using training to ensure that officers have the knowledge, skills, and judgments to act under agency policy, using early intervention systems and appropriate reward structures for critical incidents. So basically, the philosophy of the use of force from the department, from the executives, has a lot to do with that. Are you training your people? What is your outlook? What is the belief of the department? Are you rewarding people who could have used the use of force appropriately? Departments should establish policies that guide the most critical decisions made by personnel. Make certain that personnel are trained in what the policies mean and how to apply them. Hold personnel accountable for abiding by policy. Continually review policies. So when you have to make sure that first of all, that you have continuing training, that people understand what the policies are. And for people who don't abide by those policies, there has to be accountability for that. And that's one of the main things. If you have a department where they don't have accountability for use of force, I can show you a department eventually that will run amok and you will start getting complaints and issues associated with use of force. Perf 30 principles of use of force. So these 30 principles use of force, there's 30 of them. I'm not going to read through all of those. What I want you to do is to pause and read through each one of those 30 use of force. And you'll see exactly what they're laying out in the 30 principles of use of force. Something that law enforcement agencies and officers should be very familiar with. Recommendations for a national police shooting database. This is something that comes up periodically when it's like, so for instance, when you have shooting incidents and stuff, a lot of times it's isolated to particular agencies. So this agency knows what they are, or maybe this agency knows what they are. Even a state may know what they are in certain places, but you don't have a national one. And this is something that some people have called for. So you would have all this information that can be compiled and put into like a national database for all law enforcement and all the public to see. And you can socio-ecological context, geographic identifiers, situational circumstance, suspect possessed a weapon and or resisted arrest. So they want to break it down, and when you put it in there, they're going to give you the demographics or the events, the facts and details of what transpired, to include the officer, not only the suspect, what went down, how it went down, but also that of the officer. Recommendations regarding the use of conductive energy device, tasers, so CEDs. So if injury reduction is the primary goal, agencies should forbid the use of less than lethal weapons, OC spray, and CEDs on passive resistors. So basically, you don't want to use these things on people who are passive resistance. For instance, if you're talking to somebody and they're just being disrespectful, you don't want to use these types of things on it. When you use these things, you want to make sure that people have been trained on them properly. They know how to use them and when to use them. For instance, you don't want to use them on somebody too many times or too long of a period of time. These are the things that officers have to know. Police pursuits. So everybody's going to have a pursuit policy in law enforcement. And they're going to tell you, when do we pursue? When do we not pursue? And everybody has to know that. One of the problems you run into sometimes is when you have multiple agencies working together. You have to make sure people have to understand what pursuit policy are you going to abide by. They have to be agreed upon about these issues. They are dangerous, placing police officers, suspects, and innocent people at risk. One of the things about them is, because if you have somebody who stole, let's just say somebody who stole a crate of sodas, drinks, and he's got 24 of them that he stole. He goes, jumps his car, and he flees. And the police officers get into a high-speed chase on that. Is that something that you really want to be doing a high-speed chase on? Because a high police chase, a pursuit on vehicle pursuit, because all the things that could go wrong, how they could hit pedestrians, how they could kill somebody, injured. Not only just the guy who's fleeing, but also the police. Many cases like that, law enforcement would decide not to pursue that and say, you know what, we know who he is, we will get him on another day. Suggested reforms on police pursuits. Having a secondary uninvolved officer make the arrest of a suspect. Training officers to increase their awareness of what happens to them during a pursuit. Having supervisors take action to prevent use of force following a pursuit by holding officers accountable of their accountability. In addition, police departments have mandated pursuits be terminated when the risk outweigh the benefits, which I just gave you an example of. But one of the things too they're saying is when you have somebody who gets into a high vehicle pursuit, having another officers there who respond saying who deal with the people afterwards. One of the reasons is because the police officers are amped up. They're amped up, and they might be a little pissed off at the fact that they have to chase the guy or whatever else. So they might be inclined to do some things or say some things that they shouldn't. Having secondary officers there helps. Racial profiling. Racial profiling is the selective and intrusive use of police discretionary power based upon a person's race. It can involve stopping, searching, investigation of minorities traveling in vehicles based upon their racial or ethnic background rather than their actions. Racial profiling makes it more difficult for the police to practice proactive crime fighting techniques. One of the things that I used to always do when I was doing training for people, I would always tell, particularly civilians, if I was doing training for them as a law enforcement officer, I would tell them, you should not profile race. You can't look at someone and say, because he's black, he's going to steal from me. Because he's white, he's going to steal from me. Because he's Asian, he's going to steal from me. What I would always encourage them, watch their actions and listen to things that they say. That will let you know whether or not if you're dealing with a criminal or you're dealing with somebody who, if it's a place or a jewelry store and you have somebody comes in and they're asking you crazy questions and stuff, that's not normal. Something's not right about that. That's not going to be because he's a Hispanic male. It's going to be because he's a criminal. And he's asking you questions because he's trying to figure out what type of surveillance system do you have, or, all these types of things. So you have to listen to what people say and watch their actions, not their race. Issues in determining racial profiling. Difficulty of establishing a valid benchmark in traffic stop studies. Reliance upon the officer to generate traffic stop data. Ghosting. Failure to record demeanor of the driver. Capturing citizens' perceptions of the propriety of the police actions. So when you look at that, you have the difficulties because, when you're looking at pulling people, well, why did you pull them over? What did they do and stuff? And you can't say, well, because he was an Asian guy driving through a black community, I pulled him over. That's not a legal reason to pull someone over. Failure to capture the demeanor when you're writing reports. It's like, okay, if you have somebody that you pull them over, or you see some things, it's like, you know what? The guy's doing some things right there. The reason I pulled him over, not because he's an Asian guy driving through a black community, it was because of what he was doing while he was driving and how he was driving. Made me suspect that something's not right here. And lo and behold, you find out you pull the guy over and because he runs the stop sign, so you have a legitimate reason to pull him over, and you find out that he's got guns and other stuff in the car because he's planning to come back and rob a store, and he was looking for one to actually rob when you saw him. Mixed findings on traffic stop studies. Richmond, Virginia study. African Americans were disproportionately stopped, but minority drivers were more likely to be warned, while white drivers were ticketed or arrested. So you see, you have some mixed findings. African Americans were disproportionately stopped, but they got away with a lot more warnings, but more white drivers were ticketed or arrested. Therefore, while African Americans were more likely to be stopped, whites were more likely to be the target of official police action. Overton Park, Kansas study. Black drivers were more likely to be stopped by the police, and the minorities were more likely to be stopped at night. So you see these different things where you find stuff, you find there's nothing you can look at across the board, across the country, across states and say everything's the same. It's going to be different. When you do studies in certain places, you'll find some things that will stand out to you. Police officer traffic stop decision makings. Officers may use stereotypes and things to pull people over. And, and this may develop an unconscious bias for people who are different race, ethnicity, or age, or whatever else. Officers got to use their discretions when they're searching individuals. And search decisions raises the intrusive series of a traffic stop. So when you're searching someone, You have to have probable cause to search them. Legal limits on decision to search. You can't just say, well, I want to search your car, or just say, I want to search your car, just go and search it. You have to have probable cause to do so. And if you don't, and you search a car, you find things, that's considered, in the legal terms, it's called fruit from the poisonous tree. And it basically means if you lock them up for it and they go to trial, a judge is going to dismiss it because what you seized from the person was not lawfully done. Now, you can have what we refer to as a search incident to arrest. When you arrest someone for something, and then now you're going to do a search of that person. You might even do a search of that person's vehicle, a search incident to arrest, because you arrested them for something. Here's some more examples of our actual stops and stuff by law enforcement officers. Um, Racial profiling studies of searches by police. So when you look at this, you see traffic stops may be a pretext to justify the actual intention to search individuals. So you find that sometimes police officers will try to justify, well, I stopped you for this, but they're really stopping them because they want to search them because there's 3 black males in the car. Our research consistently concludes that searches were more likely to be conducted on and when males, often black males, young drivers of a race, stops were made at night. Blacks were more likely to be searched in predominantly white neighborhoods, especially when stopped by white officers. And the same was true of white drivers in predominantly black neighborhoods. So the results can provide justification for the conclusion that police practices are biased against racial minorities. So again, you see things and you wonder why. Look, if you see a white woman at night riding through a predominantly black neighborhood, that doesn't mean she's down there doing something wrong. It just means that she doesn't look like everybody else down there. And so one of the things what people will do is like, well, if I see somebody that stands out, what a lot of police officers do, I'm not profiling her because she's white. I'm not profiling her at all. I'm saying that she doesn't look like she lives down here. And here's something else too. What if she's a white woman who's driving through a predominantly black neighborhood, a high crime neighborhood, in a $150,000 car? Well, that's odd. So what police officers might do, I can't pull her over and just say, I'm going to stop her because she's white, but I am going to watch to see what this person may do because this person doesn't live down here. That I know because I work the beat, and people down here don't drive $150,000 cars. You see, there's multiple things that's popping up there. It's not just she's white. She's in a place where hardly no white people live. She's in a place that's a high crime area. She's driving a $150,000 car. So what they may do is follow this person to see where she goes. And sometimes you may find out she's down there to buy drugs or something like that. And now you know because you saw her go to the drug house. That's a reason to pull her over. Consent searches. When you get a consent search and stuff, you find that the driver may also be voluntarily consent to a search and thus eliminate the need for probable cause. Some scholars have argued that the consent search is ultimately exercise of police search discretion because the officer is not duty bound to conduct a search. So when you find that someone has a consent search, you may pull somebody over for a traffic stop or whatever else, and then you may ask them, you know what, do you mind if I search your vehicle? They may say, okay, yes, you can. But they may also say no. If they say yes, you can, then you can actually search that vehicle. Prevention of racial profiling. Recommendations. Summarize a disproportionate activity. Identify the explanations based upon disproportionality. Identify alternate explanations. Compare the performance of the disproportionate units to other units similar. Evaluate the plausibility of the competing explanations. So when you look at profiling, racial profiling, prevention of it stuff, one of the things you can find out is disproportionate. And it's not consistent with other places that's very similar to it. And it's like, well, this place over here is predominantly African American. This place is predominantly African American. But in the second one, it's like African Americans get pulled over 10 times more than they do in the other neighborhood that's predominantly African American. Body-worn cameras. So now you have these things where we're talking with body cams, where officers now, and more officers are going to body cams. And the way the body cams work is usually they're activated upon a traffic stop or an actual situation where officers are responding to the scene. If they're just talking to somebody on the street, a lot of times there's no body camera activation on it because you're just talking to somebody. Now that could turn bad because you're just talking to them, and then you decide that, you know what, let me turn it on or whatever else. But these things you have, and one of the ways it's supposed to do is supposed to increase police accountability and reduce suspicious behavior, and restore public trust in law enforcement agencies. And the basic premises of this: if you have body cams, some police officers who might be inclined to do some things will not do them because they know that they're going to be on a body cam. And to give you an example, if I was a corrupt police officer and I don't turn my body cam on, but there's 5 other officers out there who respond to the saying we have an incident, well, it don't matter because the other 5 turn their body cams on, and they actually caught me doing wrong things on it. Legitimacy is present when citizens believe that the police have moral authority to enforce the law and deserve respect and compliance with them. So people will voluntarily obey the law. So when you have legitimacy, this is where you have police departments where the community believes that they are, for the most part, fair and they do things legal and above board. They will respect the police department. They will comply with it. And a lot of things that will reduce is a lot of times is defiance. People fighting back, resistance, not complying or not answering questions because they actually feel like it's legitimate. Favorable assessments of police departments' legitimacy by citizens have been found to relate to satisfaction with police control of disorder and crime. So that means most of the communities are happy with their police department and the way they do things. Now, you don't get everybody who's on board who agrees, but most people will. So legitimately hotspot policing. So this is when police have to go to an area along with a problem identified at hotspots. The police should also note stakeholders, resources in the area and solve the problem. So when you have a situation when you have hotspots, and let's say I call it a high crime area where crime is spiked, and police have to go in there, you still have to have legitimacy. So one of the things a couple of things you want to do is speak with community leaders, people in the community, let them know what you're going to do, why you're doing it, and get their buy-in. And also this, a lot of times you have people, they will contact the police and say, hey, y'all need to do something about this crime that's happening in my community, and get them on board. Procedural justice. Procedural justice is concerned with the officer's use of rational, neutral, and transparent decision-making. It provides tangible evidence that the police can be trusted to use their coercive authority in a trustful manner. So when you look at procedural stuff, they have procedures and policy they must abide by when they go about. And I'll give you an example. If the police department has a policy about how the chain of custody, when they seize property, then they must abide by that. So if they seize the property, and then they must get that property into evidence within 24 hours. That means that the police officer can't seize the evidence, put it in his police car, and go home and stay for 3 days and then bring the evidence back and then put it in. That's a procedural issue, and that will cause a serious problem when it comes to trial. Quality of decision making. Do the police accurately apply the law, and are the decisions based upon facts? Do they try to understand these facts in the situation before acting? So when you look at quality of police decision making, are you making decisions based upon policy and the law? Most importantly, the law. And if you do that, a lot of times, even if you make a mistake and it's unintentional, you will come out all right. Quality of treatment by the police. How do they treat people? Do they take people's needs and concerns into account? Bottom line is this: as a police officer, whether you're talking to the president of the United States, the governor or a state, or a IBM executive, or someone who's an alcoholic or drug addict on the street, they're still people. How do you treat people? You treat them with respect for them until they show you otherwise. Moral principles, impartiality, neutrality. Officers' decisions should be made without basis of self-interest. Citizen voice, giving citizens the opportunity to be heard, to present information, support their position. So when officers make their decisions, you want to make sure it's not an unbiased decision. Meaning, I'm not doing what I'm doing because of these are young girls out here, and so I'm going to lock them up out here so to keep them from getting into prostitution. They may not be into prostitution. They may be on the streets, just hanging out. It's not up to me to be biased against young girls hanging out on the streets. Transparency and consistency is something that's very big when it comes to having the trust of the communities and law enforcement working together. Transparency basically means that the community feels like you're not hiding things. The things that you can tell them and show them, you do. Some things, obviously, you can't. And you're consistent no matter what the situation is, how you go about doing things. Sovereigns and warriors. The report on 21st century policing recommends a change in police culture from the crime fighter, warrior self-image to that of a democratic guardian who values the dignity and rights of humans. Sovereigns are actors whose views can significantly impact the police organization. They include individuals from federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies, national and local media, law enforcement employee, community organizations, medical providers, elected representatives. So the report on 21st century policing was one of the things that I've read, and it's very interesting. And it is saying policing has evolved, and the way we used to do things with the crime fighter warrior like militaristic type way of policing and stuff is not appropriate to deal with the way things are today. People who are communities, law enforcement agencies that are more accurate, have better relationships with communities. They practice a democratic guardians, and they value the dignity and human rights of people, and it's more participatory. They have better relations. So some of the things that they recommend was change the culture of policing, embrace the community pilot policing as a philosophy, as a way of doing business, ensure fair and impartial policing, build community capital, pay attention to officers' wellness and safety. Technology, both new and emerging, is changing the way we police. So they're saying, the world has evolved and policing has to evolve. And one of the big ways of doing that is community policing, as well as some of these other things where you actually have building up capital with the community and have a good relations with them. Budgetary recommendations. Think long-term. Develop a strategic plan with long-term time frame. Do not cut costs. Look for revenue opportunities. Invite innovation. Focus on what is kept rather than on what has to be cut. Allocate budget dollars for your top goals. So when you're looking at it long term, think about what it is you need long term. Don't look at just cutting costs, but look at how do we generate, or how do we look for the revenue opportunities to be able to do new stuff. Always look for the innovation. Don't police the same way for 30 years. And look for things that actually, what's the most important goal for you in your budget. Recruitment and retention of officers. This is very important. Because if you have a situation where you're struggling with recruitment, you're struggling with retention, I can show you somewhere that's going to be definitely on demand. And you need new bodies to come in to keep the law enforcement agency going. But you have to have retention of officers because those are your experienced people. So the present generation of police recruits have attributes that are distinctly different from their predecessors. For instance, millennials are considered conscientious and independent in their thinking, while also more tolerant of differences than those of other generations. So you see that you already have some differences right there. They're more conscious and independent. Give you an example. Millennials are more likely to question what management tells them than police officers were in the past. Not because they're trying to be defiant, but because they're independent thinkers and they want to understand the why behind what you're asking them. And they don't mean to be disrespectful when they do it. They are more tolerant. These millennials have grown up in a more diverse era. They're more tolerant of people that have differences than their predecessors were. Police leadership needs to understand them, utilize them properly, or lose them to the organization. Bottom line is this: if you bring them in, one of the things is millennials are much more likely to leave a job due to job dissatisfaction than their predecessors were. So here's some problems. Are they a generation that expects to be empowered and make too many demands for information and feedback? Is it equally likely that they are seeking clarification of roles and responsibility, but in ways perceived as challenging to make their supervisors uncomfortable? What I just said earlier, some supervisors will view it as that. Do they want lucrative, easy ride, or are they looking for meaningful work? Are they risk averse, hesitant to go hands-on? Do they expect ongoing accolades for work, even when they basically don't deserve it? Does their questioning of rules means actual resistance, or do they wish to understand the rules and learn the history of why? So you have to understand there's different, and you do have a clash sometimes when you have millennials who are answering to people who are who from previous generations. Internal organizational legitimacy. Legitimacy is also tied to the fairness of the workplace. Authentic leaders are guided by a set of values based upon what is right and fair, both themselves and organization. Employees wish to see their decision makers at work are made in an unbiased and impartial manner. So people want to be treated. So internal organizational legitimacy. Are you treating people fair? Or is it a situation where people can see that, when you're promoting folks, you're only promoting a certain type of person? Or when you discipline people, when you discipline people, this group of people seems to get disciplined is much more severe than what others get. The Ferguson effect refers to a perceived negative response in the performance of law enforcement officers due to increased scrutiny and bad publicity in the media. Reasons: the police are disengaging from vigorous activities or even arrests, and thus crime rates are increasing. The lack of desire by police officers to partner with community members to prevent crime, also due to changes in law, departmental policy, implementation of new policies, strategies, civil lawsuits establishment. So when you look at it, it refers to a perceived negative response in the law enforcement of officers, and it's due to things that they perceive as, if I do my job, I'm going to get in trouble. I let people slide. I turn my back to certain crimes and stuff, and I don't try to prevent them because I don't want to be sued and I don't want to get in trouble. So, research on the Ferguson effect after Ferguson, Missouri, and where officers actually killed a young African American male. He was shot and killed, and this is what they found. The survey found that officers were less motivated because of negative publicity, also expressed less self-legitimacy. A study demonstrated the deputies who felt that their supervisors practiced organizational fairness were less likely to lack motivation, perceived more on-the-job danger, and believed their colleagues feel negative effects of Ferguson, and the citizens were less likely to support them. So they felt like after this came out, this police department found out that they had issues, major issues, and a lot of it was internal, about not only about how people felt about their job, but also how they felt about the organization, and felt about how the community thought about them. St. Louis, Missouri study found that no credible effect on homicides or missed result for violent crimes and temporal effect on property crimes. Similarly, a time series analysis of police officers killed in the line of duty found no evidence of a Ferguson effect for the period. Organizational justice and self-legitimacy are important predictors of willingness to engage in the community. So you got to look at these things and take into consideration is even if you are your agencies, your law enforcement agencies, organizations practicing community policing, do you have officers out there who's actually doing it? Effective policing, strategic policing is a continuing process of enhancing the effectiveness of a police department through its use of the latest information analysis techniques to develop targeted innovative strategy. Strategic police leadership requires the executives proactively develop and implement an organizational direction that allows the departments to meet the demands. So when you look at strategic policing, everything is done for a purpose. Everything is done for a reason, and everything is done systematically, and people can justify that. So they will engage in systemic problem solving, experimentation with new approaches, learning from their own experiences in the past, learning from the experiences and best practices of others, transferring of intelligence quickly, efficiently throughout the organization, continual dialogue, double loop learning, operational flexibility. So you can see that when you have these type of organizations, they are, I call them learning organizations. They're forward thinking and they're open-minded. The use of evidence-based practices. Police should, this is recommendations from Lawrence Sherman, 1998. Police should conduct and apply good research and target scarce resources on predictable concentrations of harm from crime and disorder. Once police choose their high priority targets, then they should review and conduct tests of police methods to help choose what works best for them. Once police agencies use research to target these tested practices, they should generate and use internal evidence to track the daily delivery, and effects of the best practice in those times. So bottom line is, when you do this, there is evidence to support. Evidence and data reflects this is what we should do. You can articulate why are we doing this? Because this is what the evidence and data says we should do, and we've gotten a good result from it. Principles of good policing, guardians of democracy, recommended strategy, begin to redefine policing in the 21st century. Strengthen and rebuild the capacity of police agencies to develop legitimate sustainability relationships. Implement meaningful ways to define and measure success in the community. So it's not that difficult when you look at, particularly when you take into consideration the 21st century policing goals and things that were recommended. As law enforcement agencies abide by this and use those, they actually do work, and they are going to set you up for effective policing in today's climate. The Department of Justice recommendations. So police departments should preserve and advance the principles of democracy. The police should not only respect but also protect the rights of people. The police should place its highest value on preservation of human life. The police department believes that prevention of crime is its #1 operational priority. The police should involve the community in the delivery of the services. So bottom line is, when you sit down, I know this sounds simple, but there are a lot of historically agencies that didn't do this. But one of the things I look at right here is just like, hey, understand, my goal is not to lock people up. My goal is to reduce crime. Think about what I just said. My goal is not to lock people up. My goal is to reduce crime. So if you're thinking that way, one of the ways you might look at people and deal with them might be different. I'm not looking to lock you up. I'm looking to reduce crime. Now, if I have to lock you up to reduce a crime, then that's what I'm going to do. Or if I can just talk to you and get you not to do something, or be somewhere and be present and get you not to do something, that will also work. So the police are accountable to the community they serve. The police department should be committed to professional in all aspects. So again, when you have the police departments, when they're working, think of them effective policing, then the police department is part of the community. And it's working with the community to get things done for effective policing. Effective police organizations are led by individuals who set direction for today and tomorrow. They're forward thinking. They're not looking at just what we do today, but we're also looking at how can we sustain this and what can we do for the future. That concludes this chapter.